I'm Heather Morgan, and I'm from Sales Folk and Sales for Startups, and I'm here today talking with Nancy Nardin from Smart Selling Tools. She is one of the top 25 bloggers for sales in the world, named by HubSpot, and also one of the top 25 sales industry influencers in the world, named by a number of organizations. Nancy, thanks for talking to us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you so much. My first question for you is, how did you get into sales?
Why I love that question. It's always fun to hear how other people ended up in sales. And in fact, this last blog post I wrote was entitled, Guess What, Dad? I'm Going Into Sales. And it's about I graduated from college in 3 years, ahead of the game, and had a business degree. And like a lot of people, I didn't know what the heck I wanted to do. There was no sales training course, so I ended up going into retail to be a buyer for retail. Retail, store, basically,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I quickly learned that retail is not the best place to be. And now I'm stuck, right? And I don't know what
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do. So I start looking around for jobs in the newspaper. This is way back in the early 80s. And I found that Radio Shack was opening up a computer center. So I thought, computers, that's kind of interesting. Maybe I'll get into computers. So I walked myself in and applied for the job as a salesperson at Radio Shack Computer Center, and that's how I got started in the field.
Wow, that's quite, that's not the average story that you hear every day. When you think of, like, modern sales and Radio Shack, they're usually not associated, but that's quite the story. So,
No, no, they're
at,
not.
so after Radio Shack until now, how did you become such a sales influencer?
Well, just one foot in front of the other, right? I mean, I've been carrying a bag for more than 25 years. I've always enjoyed sales. What happened is I learned that selling to businesses, right? Because even at Radio Shack, I would go in and I tried to sell to the government and I tried to sell to computers to businesses. So I knew that that was a really fun and fascinating kind of role to try to understand people's needs. And I really just, the bug bit me right away. But I didn't want to stay with Radio Shack
Mm-hmm.
forever. And again, I was lamenting, what the heck am I going to go do next? And I flew back to Iowa, which is where I'm from, to kind of think about it. And on the airplane, I was sitting, there was one last seat, and some guy walked in at the very end, and I thought, oh my God, this guy is going to be a total jerk. Why am I going to end up sitting next to this jerk? And how is that, for prejudging people, right? Well, this guy sat down, he started asking me about what I did, and I told him, and lo and behold, he was in sales and he was a sales manager and he was looking for a sales rep, and he liked all the things that I was telling him, and one thing led to another. And the next thing I knew, I was moving myself to San Francisco, which, for a kid from Iowa originally, but at this point I was in Sacramento, but originally from Iowa, moving to San Francisco
Yeah,
was a really deal. Actually, technically, it wasn't San Francisco; it was Silicon Valley,
still.
and the company was called Grid, and Grid was the very first laptop computer. I'm not talking
Wow.
about a portable sewing machine, but the laptops like we kind of see today.
Yeah.
And they were located right across from another startup in Mountain View called, you may have heard of them, called Sun Micro.
Oh, yeah.
So that was back when they were a startup. So now we're going
Wow.
back in time. So, a lot of it is really, luck. You put yourself out there, and you hope that some luck will, come your way as well. And it did. I worked for Grid for a number of years, and like I said, I was selling laptops. And who are you going to sell those to? Well, who's in the field a lot, and that's salespeople. So I became interested in sales tools before there were really any sales tools, when CRM and SFA really kind of came to being because of the introduction of the laptop.
That's really cool. So, how have you felt that obviously sales tools themselves have physically changed a lot over that time, but how has your strategy for selling sales tools changed from the early days of selling laptops to what you're doing today?
That's a good question. I don't know that it has really changed a whole lot, not in terms of selling skills. You're still selling to, in the same way. I mean, you're still
Yeah.
having to try to uncover what their requirements are. But perhaps maybe one thing that's changed a lot is that the number of people involved in any one decision has gone way up. And today we know from CSO research that that number for enterprises is somewhere around 6 people that are involved. Personally, I think it's a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably changed. Gone are the days where you can walk in and you can have a conversation and you can decide on what the next step is and know that that's going to happen because that's your decision maker. It's more complicated nowadays.
That's a good point. Yeah, we definitely have a lot more complex sales cycles today with a lot more soft touch points required. So,
yeah, that's it for sure. Well, the other thing is that buyers come to you with a lot more knowledge.
That's true.
Because we have the internet now. And so they've done their research. It's not us calling them up and explaining that we have something to offer and then needing to rely on us to get information about what the product can do. They can do all of that on their own.
And so with both those changes in mind, what do you think the most important aspect of sales is? Like, what is the one thing that a salesperson does today that is the most important? Keeping in mind that you have a lot of decision makers involved and people are a lot more self-educated already. What is maybe that one or two things that a salesperson does that are really crucial?
I guess I'm going to say it's just persistence and don't let it get you down. Because if you're the kind of person where if you have kind of a pessimistic nature anyway, it's going to be really tough to make it in sales. You have to be a believer. You have to be optimistic. You have to not take things personally. If they're not returning your phone call, you can't think, geez, they're not interested, because that may not even be the case. Today it takes, as you know, probably 9, 10, 12 different touches to get through to someone. People are really busy. So I just say persistence and a positive attitude. I know that sounds really trite, but that's the basics.
Resilience.
And the basics matter. Yeah,
definitely.
Resilience.
That's great. So you've had a lot of really big clients, some of the 30 biggest companies out there in the last 10 years or so. What are some of the most important sales lessons that you've learned from these clients? And maybe name one or two.
Well, so I'd like to talk about some of the clients that I have in the recent history, in my recent career, which, I've been doing the smart selling tools thing for about 7 years now. And the clients that I work with are the sales tools vendors themselves, who are trying to figure out how do they sell to the sales organization, and how do they get in front of them? How do they message what it is that they have to do, what they're offering? And I also work with the end users themselves, who are trying to figure out how do we incorporate sales tools, where do we start, that sort of thing. But when talking with, and I know your audience, I believe, is kind of on startup focus.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. That
okay.
Is
so I was thinking about that specifically because I do have a lot of clients that are startups. They've got a dream. They have an idea for a product that sales organizations really need. And this is a hot area right now. So the most important lesson that I think I've learned working with them is that a lot of it is about messaging.
Absolutely.
It's not about the sales skills again, but it's about how you sell, what you say to them. I do a lot of messaging work. I do a lot of evaluations of presentations to see whether or not they're concise. I do a lot of what I call conversation maps. So if you've actually, I really recommend for a startup that they sit down and figure out what's the conversation flow going to be. What will they likely say to what I have to say? How will I spin from that and pivot? What kinds of questions am I likely to get? So I think that, the important lesson there for sales for startups is to just think through from your prospect's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, you know what? We have the curse of knowledge when we're trying to sell our own things, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So that's hard for startups. They really, so much about your product and you want to say so much about it. So where do you start? And you want to keep it simple. People don't know everything that you know. So it's important to start at the high level view. But people have a short attention span. So you got to get to the meat quickly as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And you have to provide context. So, it's a really difficult balancing job to navigate. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges for sales startups and any sales organization, actually, but for startups particularly.
That makes a lot of sense, and it actually goes along with what my consultancy does a lot. We help startups with messaging, B2B sales startups with messaging for sales and marketing more towards sales, to refine the message to get it to be very narrow and focused. A lot of times you'll have a company trying to show like 4 different points, and they're all features, not benefits, when really they should just be focusing on like that one core benefit, the one unique value prop that is their superpower.
Yes, that's a really great way to put it. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, your service is very much needed.
Well, I hope so. Thank you. So my next question for you is on the same lines of startups. So a lot of startups today are competing in spaces with some big competitors. How would you advise those startups to deal with their giant B2B Goliath-sized competitors? Like, I guess people who are trying to create their own CRM that are competing with Salesforce or anything like that, basically.
Well, listen, earlier on I mentioned Sun Micro, right?
Yeah.
There is no Sun Micro anymore.
That is true.
And so just because there's a lot of bigger competitors doesn't mean that you can't find a way to win and compete against them. And in fact, I'd say startups have a big advantage over big companies in a number of ways. One is that, they can be more agile.
Yeah, definitely.
They can pivot on a dime if they need to. They can add more features if they need to. They don't have all the legacy that they have to deal with. So I would say, look for the Achilles heel, which I'm sure they've already done. If they've started up a product, they've looked for something that's missing in the market. But also, they will be compared against companies that could do something maybe somewhat similar. So look for those big competitors' Achilles heels. What's the market saying about them? They're probably saying they're probably fighting their own impression in the market, like maybe their product is too complex or their pricing is too inflexible. Look for those types of Achilles heels that you can compete against, and also specialize. Maybe your competitor can do everything, but you can be the best. So don't try to play at their game, because you won't win.
That's a really good point.
I liked your point about focusing and specializing, because as a startup you want to be able to say you can do this and this and this, but that maybe what your entree in, maybe your door opening is really that one thing that you can shine at and be the best at, and no one can compete. That's kind of typical innovator's dilemma stuff.
Yeah, no, and I really agree with that. I'm working on an article right now that's talking about just that, but I always think of Yesware, and Yesware is doing so well right now, and they're a great company. And we love them. They're a sponsor for Sales for Startups. They're great people, but I think a big part of their success is their core is email tracking. And while it seems like a simple feature, it's such a simple, easy to describe, yet core feature. And they have a lot of other things they can do, but like that's the centerpiece. And I think companies that try to talk about too many features, they get lost in trying to figure out who to sell to, what messaging to focus on, and just what to build
Yeah.
and what to focus on.
True. And the thing about Yesware, which I agree, it's a great tool for sales organizations, is they don't really have to deal with as many decision makers. They're probably just
Yeah.
going in and pitching the sales leader.
Yeah.
And even a lot of the sales tools I see, they have to sell to both the sales and the marketing organization. So I guess if
Yeah.
you can find a way to get your traction as a startup by only having to sell to one piece of the
Yeah.
organization and then expand, land and
Yeah.
expand, right?
I like
That's
that.
probably smart.
That's actually a really great catchphrase. Land and expand. I like that. Yeah, so this brings me on to my next question. You mentioned something before in your writing called a sales energy audit. So can you tell me a little bit more about that and how that's helpful for salespeople?
Sure. It's aimed at sales organizations. And when I talk to organizations that are looking for tools to increase their revenue and their productivity, what we're really talking about is becoming more efficient. And I call it sales energy. Just like you'd have someone come in and do an energy audit on your house or your business to see where you could be more efficient, you really need to do that for your own sales organization. We take a lot of things for granted, like we ask our reps to do a lot for us. Give us an update, a one-on-one update, and let's drill down on these 50 accounts or 20, 10, even 10 accounts. Give me a report on this. Can you update your forecast in this format? We ask them to do a lot that keeps them away from selling. And so just to be more cognizant of that, I call it looking for the left-hand turns, because UPS did this recently. Well, a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
they discovered that just by eliminating left-hand turns, they could save like 9 million gallons of fuel a year and 90 million miles or something
Yeah.
absurd like that. Well, they just looked for one simple thing that helped them increase their efficiency, and sales organizations can do that as well. So that's a sales energy audit. We do that. You could do that yourself, if you want. But if we do it, we come in, we, interview the different sales people. We kind of take a look at their day. We might be able to get at things that a manager isn't able to get at because we're not that close.
Yeah.
But either way, I'd say go and do a sales energy audit. You got to get your reps in front of sales reps more. Right now, reps are only spending about 35% of their time in front of prospects.
That's a very good point.
So,
I like that a lot. It kind of, it's sort of like the Japanese principle of Kanban with Ford, but applying it directly with sales organizations. So very cool.
It's actually exactly like that. And, we are manufacturing revenue.
Yeah.
So we're not that different from manufacturing automobiles or anything else. We manufacture revenue, and the more of that production line we can keep humming, and the more we can, send out the other end, the more revenue we'll have. And so that has to do with efficiency.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I have one last question for you. Since your company is Smart Selling Tools, what are some of the different sales tools that you recommend for B2B companies looking to scale and just be more successful?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And, it depends on where you are in your startup process, how far in you are. Are you hiring salespeople? Will they be in the field? Do you depend on presentations a lot? So let me let me say one thing. First of all, I have what I've called the top 40 sales tools of 2014. That's a great place to start. If you go to our homepage, you'll
Okay.
see it right there. Click on that. It's, there's videos for each product. So it's a real easy way to quickly find out about new tools. But I would say keep a couple of things in mind. One is that look for things that don't require a lot of resources to implement,
Definitely.
especially as a startup, don't have that.
Yeah.
Also look for tools that don't require a lot of resources to maintain. So marketing automation, for instance, is a great example of that. Wonderful tool, can work, has its functionality, very powerful, but it requires people to keep it up, and it requires content to feed it. It's a content beast. You have to keep feeding it.
Yeah.
So it might not be the most appropriate. I would say look at some simple tools like Witty Parrot.
Okay.
Witty Parrot it's a little bit like a Yesware in that you can know when someone opens your email. And by the way, I think that's one of the best kinds of tools, whether you get Yesware, Witty Parrot, or ToutApp. Get a tool that will tell you when your prospects are opening up your
Definitely.
email. That's huge. But Witty Parrot does something else as well, which is it allows you to create templates, and not just for email, but for call scripts, for instance,
Oh, very
for
cool.
proposals, for presentations. And when you're a startup and you're starting to develop your
Yeah.
messaging, something you'll be interested in, since you do a lot of this messaging
Yeah.
work, is if someone asks this question, what's your response going to be? Or what do you always want
Yeah.
to include in an email when they inquire at this stage in the sales cycle? Those templates are all, part of a shared database, if you will, um, of content nuggets that you
Yeah.
can drag into an email, drag into a presentation. So that's a great
That's
one,
really
Witty Parrot.
cool.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
want
I
to
think
check
you'll
that
like
out.
that one. And very inexpensive, very easy to implement. It's really a no-brainer. It's great. Then if you're hiring new people, you don't have to. They'll know what the new
Yeah.
messages are and what the right written content
That's a
is.
really great way to
But another,
onboard them. Oh, sorry. I was going to say that's a
yeah,
really great way for just onboarding new employees.
it's perfect for that. Yep, great application for that. Another tool is Bloomfire, and that is a kind of a collaboration tool, but it's more than that. And it's sort of it's like a portal, if you will. So when you just have 6 people and you need to be able to share documents, then easy tool for that. But then when you grow to 12 people and you grow to 50 people, you're still going to need a tool that can do that for you. Where, let's say I just hang up from a prospect call and I discovered the perfect objective, answer to not an objective, an objection. I've always gotten those confused.
No problem.
Uh, and you want to share that, you can do a quick webcam, share what your response is, post it on the Bloomfire on your collaboration tool. So you start to create and store all of this content that your
Yeah.
salespeople and your marketers and product marketers can get to easily. So that's Bloomfire. SaaS based, doesn't cost a lot of money, easy to implement. So those are 2
That's
really
very
quick
nice.
tools, along with going to the guide.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a really great call. Lots and lots of information.
Thanks, my pleasure. This is fun, and I really like what you do a lot. You're providing a great service, so it's fun to be able to jump on and give you my own perspective and talk about tools.
Well, thank you so much. I'm Heather Morgan with Salesfolk and Sales for Startups, and this has been Nancy Nardin from Smart Selling Tools. She is one of the top 25 sales bloggers in the world, named by HubSpot. This video has been brought to you by Salesfolk and Sales for Startups. Visit us at salesfolk.com and salesforstartups.org. Thank you.